They are a faith community. And rather than being people of bitterness in the face of their persecution, they made a commitment to serve all people. I want you to meet them today. Stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
We read in our newspapers, in our magazines, and watch on our television screens about persecution, suffering, ethnic cleansing that is going on today. But that's not new to the faith community or to our world. The group you're going to meet today on Austin Faith Dialogue experienced such suffering, and out of the birth of their suffering, they are a people who have made a commitment to serve. I'd like you to meet today Pastor Kathy Reed of the Austin Mennonite congregation here in our community, and David Kemp, a member of that congregation. Great to have you both on this program of Austin Faith Dialogue, and thank you for being a part of our community. And as host of the program, I want you to know I've learned so much already about that I probably should have learned in seminary, but I'm not so sure I learned it, Kathy, in seminary, but you're helping me learn it, and I want the people who are watching our program to learn about the Mennonite community. Tell us, Kathy, if you would, a little bit about the background and history. You're an ethnic?
I'm what they call an ethnic Mennonite, which means my family, I have a stack of books about this high that takes my genealogy all the way back to certainly the 18th century and probably earlier than that in terms of my genealogy in the Mennonite church.
What would be your ethnic background?
My family came out of Switzerland, or in South Germany. There's some dispute about exactly where. My birth name is Gehring, which is a good German, South German name. Basically, Anabaptists started in the 16th century. Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands are the primary areas that they started in, and they sort of started independently all over that area, not as any kind of beginning movement. And there was no one central leader like you have with Calvinism or with Lutheranism, so that these were sort of independent movements that all fell under sort of the umbrella of being Anabaptist.
And they sprung up in the time of the Reformation. Give us a date. 16th century, about what date?
Same time as Luther, 1525. That's when a lot of the persecutions began and ran all the way through that century.
A time of ferment, a time of anger between people and people of faith. Now, you are an ethnic Mennonite, we call you. I have to get that straight, ethnic Mennonite. But, David, you're not. You have a faith background, but you came into the Mennonite community through instruction, through marriage? How did that happen?
Through marriage. I married, my wife was a Mennonite, and we joined the Mennonite Central Committee, which is a Christian volunteer organization. And we've been with the Mennonite Central Committee for 6 years in two different locations, and I guess I'd be considered an honorary Mennonite, basically. I come from a Lutheran background, but there are a lot of people in the Mennonite Church and in the Mennonite Central Committee who come from various different religious and non-religious backgrounds.
I'd like to talk a little bit about that Mennonite Central Committee. Tell us about them. Who are they, and I don't understand what they are.
Well, Mennonite Central Committee is an organization which there are 13 different types of Mennonites, actually. And we, of course, are like many denominations. There's a broad range from conservative to what we would think of progressive or liberal. And, of course, the most conservative are the Amish. And within that spectrum, one of the things that all of us sort of have that unites us is Mennonite Central Committee, which was an organization that was started to specifically provide food, shelter, and housing for people throughout the world.
So all of these groups under the umbrella of Mennonite are committed to the work of the Mennonite...
MCC.
Okay, Mennonite.
Yeah, is what we call it, and Mennonite Central Committee. And that's one of the things that brings us together. And that, David can talk a little bit about what his experience was like working for MCC, but one of the things that happens for us in Texas is there are only a handful of little Mennonite churches, but once a year we gather in Houston for what we call our MCC relief sale, in which we raise money to support the work of this organization. And that's one of the reasons that the quilt is here, is that one of the primary things we do is we quilt. We're known for our quilting, like the Amish people are, and the Amish communities, there are Amish communities in Texas, and they participate in this event and come and put their quilts on
So
sale
the
too.
Amish are also considered a part of the Mennonite community?
Yeah. Yeah, we're all sort of from the same Anabaptist roots. At that one sale in Houston, which is a small one by comparison to other sales, we make somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000. It's not a church bazaar to support our church.
Kathy, let's move your foot there a little bit, and David, let's move yours, and let's see if we can't get the camera to come in on this this beautiful quilt. Now, people in congregations, and how many congregations are out Texas?
I'd say that there are probably about less than 10 that participate in the relief sale. There aren't very many. This is not a place where there historically have been Mennonite churches. So we're all small little churches with less than 100 members.
And so they all make these quilts, and they take them to Houston.
We usually have about 60 to 70, sometimes up to 100 quilts, depending on the outer Mennonite community helps support us too by sending quilts to our relief sale. And we have quilts and we have handcrafts and all kinds of items for sale, but we always look forward to the big sellers of the quilts, and we always have a few quilts. My congregation was so proud that we had a quilt that sold for over $1,000 last year, and that's a big part of the excitement we have. I think sometimes we quilt especially hard in Texas.
And the focus of all of this is to raise money for the Mennonite Central Committee.
For what David was doing.
And David, the Mennonite Central Committee then does what? A person like yourself, you're a civil engineer in background. What do you do then? The Mennonite Central Committee says, David, go someplace?
Well, first a community we worked in Swaziland in southern Africa. We also worked in Bolivia. The first process would be for a community to ask for a volunteer to come in the area of water, in the area of health, education, agriculture, something like that. The Mennonite Central Committee will send people into that community, talk to the community, find out what their felt needs are, and then from those needs write up a job description and start recruiting in North America. My position was working with rural communities, building water projects. We provided the technical expertise. We also helped the community to locate funding for the pipe or the pumps or whatever it was. But the community did all the labor, and the community was responsible for the maintenance. The Mennonite Central Committee is not, as some other organizations are, doesn't go in and build its own projects and that type of stuff. It only, when the community says we need this or we need that, then we try to, basically I think the word is empowerment, try to help the community find those resources and provide, in my case, provide the technical expertise that they don't have, but not actually go in and build a project. They build their own projects, and we basically just provide the backstopping for those projects.
So the money that's raised from quilts and other means sends people like you, David Kemp, out into the world to empower people to build community. What was your thinking as you went out there? You're a person of faith, you have a faith background, you're not a theologian, but you are a person of faith. As you went to Swaziland and to Bolivia, what were your experiences there? What did you think about?
Well, one of the first things is how to deal with the poverty and sometimes just it looks like hopelessness in a lot of those situations, and to deal with those as a Christian and to be open to people's needs and not to take what I think should be done there and to kind of, because of the power that you have when you go into a situation like that, you have resources, you have a vehicle, you have money, you come in with a certain amount of expertise that you have that the community doesn't have, and to not let that carry you into doing what you think should be done for the community, but allowing the community to tell you what they want, and also not building something that's going to be dependent on the Mennonite Central Committee, building something that is going to be dependent on the community so that the community can carry on once the Mennonite Central Committee is gone.
In other words, in this day and time in which we are alive, there are people like you and many others from the Mennonite community who go forward to help build community in far-off places like Swaziland and Bolivia. And that word needs to get out. People need to know that. People are saying nothing is right about this world, but I meet people like you, David Kemp, and your pastor, Kathy Reed, and it seems to me like there's something very right about this world and about people who will sew these quilts, put these hand quilts together, handmade, and then empower you to go out and empower people to change their destiny. The Mennonites were born out of poverty, out of suffering, out of persecution. But there was no spiritual poverty.
Well, we think that after that initial sort of beginnings of Anabaptism, that over 5,000 Anabaptists were persecuted in the late 16th century, primarily. And that has had an impact on our culture throughout the generations. I think it still has an impact. My father's generation would have been the first generation that would have sort of moved out of what we would have considered closed communities or colonies, where we lived not communally. I mean, people owned their individual property, but lived in a close-knit community that was one of the ways that we sort of protected ourselves from the outside world.
Do you think that, Kathy, that desire to live within a close community is what leads to what David does when he goes to places around the world, to empower community to exist? That one of our needs today in our society is the need for a sense of community. So many people feel they don't belong anywhere. And what you as Mennonites seem to have is that sense of belonging, that sense of community.
I think we do have a sense of belonging, and one of the things that we have to be careful about, the tension for us, is to always be inclusive of others and allowing others to come into that space and become part of our community and open that richness that we have to others. I mean, I talk about being an ethnic Mennonite. Well, there are lots of Mennonites who are not ethnic. There are lots of Mennonites who are Hispanic. There are lots of Mennonites in Africa that are black. There are black Mennonite churches in the United States.
Ethnic Mennonites are a part of that community because they're born into it, raised in it, nurtured in it, that type of thing.
Right.
But others come in, like David, who are attracted to, well, he married a Mennonite, that's one thing, but also attracted to the idea of servanthood,
I think service is a big thing. I think the other thing that attracts people is that we have an emphasis on simple living. You'll see a lot of Mennonite churches that will have banners that quote Gandhi, "Live simply so others can simply live." There's the More with Less cookbook is a cookbook that's sort of recognized for being nutritionally sound and yet understanding the need to share the world's resources. You know, when we talk about ethnic Mennonites, one of the things that I find so interesting is that Max Knopfsinger, our city councilman, Knopfsinger is a very Mennonite name, and Max comes from Mennonite background.
Interesting.
And we, in our community, we think of Max as one of us, even though that's not the way he would see it. But yet when you hear Max talks, he talks about the environment and his concern for the environment coming out of his experience of what he was taught about being God's stewards of the world.
Yeah.
And so the Mennonite heritage follows him, even though he is not part of our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems to me like that's another one of the issues of today, that if children are raised without any kind of religious heritage, they have nothing, they live in a vacuum. And what people like the Mennonites can do is they can offer that kind of, whether they stay within the community or not, it gives to them that value structure that we so desperately need. There's a lot of tension going on in the 16th century between groups within Christendom, within the family of faith. Lutherans are a part of that, Anabaptists were a part of that, the entire experience there. There was differences theologically that were going on, persecution that was going on. But it seems that you moved past that. You moved out of that persecution mindset.
I think that we're a little different than some other groups in the sense that when we experienced the persecution, maybe parts of us even tried arming ourselves and fighting back, and we discovered that didn't work, that didn't solve the problem. That what happened in Munster, for example, with the uprising, the peasants' revolts, those kinds of things, that really didn't change the world. And that if we were going to make an impact, and if we were going to live biblically, I mean, we're a very Bible-based denomination. If we were going to live biblically, then the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself means that you live in a different way than the rest of the world does.
You're going to take that very literally. I would like to come back and talk about that in a few moments in the second part of the program and talk about pacifism and the whole idea of peace and how you live that out. Stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627 because serving Austin means serving you.
Mirror of the Martyrs, stories of courage told of the 16th century Anabaptists who gave their lives for their faith. On your screen you see a picture of compassion, and Kathy Reed, pastor of the Austin Mennonite congregation, tell us what our viewers are seeing.
Well, I picked that particular picture because I think that it's a story that you would find common in many, many Mennonite homes. At the end of the 16th century, a man by the name of Dirk Wilhelms was arrested, tried, convicted of being an Anabaptist. This was under the...
Where was this?
It was in the Netherlands under the Spanish rule. At that time, Spain ruled the Netherlands. He was put in a prison, which was actually a castle that had been converted to being a prison, and he managed to escape. He tied together some sheets and crawled down a window and escaped. And he had been in prison for a while, so his body weight was quite light. And as he ran across this pond, in escaping, he was able to cross the frozen pond by walking across the top. The jailer who spotted him escaping came behind him and was a stouter man, and hadn't been undernourished probably the same way that he had, and he fell through the ice. And the story is that Dirk stopped to rescue this man, pulled him out of the ice, saved his life, but the ungrateful guard turned around and arrested him, took him back. This time they put him in a high security prison, and eventually he was one of the thousands of people who were executed. They say his execution was really blotched. A lot of the executors apparently were very incompetent, and when they burned him at the stake, the wind was going the wrong way, and he has sustained an incredibly torturous death.
And this story comes from the book Mirror of the Martyrs.
It's called The Martyr's Mirror, which was a book that was actually printed at the end of the 17th century. That there used to be a time when almost every Mennonite family would have these, that had engravings, pictures of the martyrs and of people who died, and that was something that families carried with them. The book you have there is a new edition that's come out that's actually copies of the 23 original plates that survived to this day.
Would the Mennonite families that had these plates, these pictures, would they then tell their children the stories?
You tell the children the stories about the people who died for their faith and their acts of courage.
Reminds me of the Jewish community telling their children the story of the Passover, the same type of thing. This is what we went through and how God sustained us through all this suffering and persecution.
See, I think what's unique about us is that coming out of that experience, instead of saying, well, we need to arm ourselves and we need to find ways to defend ourselves and sort of circle the wagons and come closer in, the commandment to love is one that causes us to say, you know, first of all, our denomination believes in what we call non-resistance, which means we're pacifists. We're one of the three historic peace churches, the Mennonites from the 16th century, the Quakers from the 17th century, and the Church of the Brethren from the 18th century are the three recognized historic peace churches in the United States, which means that during wars, our religious conscientious objection has been recognized so that we don't do military service. That doesn't mean we get out of it. It means we do alternative to that in some form of service for the country.
So during conflict, wars, you would then, and the youth of the Mennonite congregations would apply for conscientious objector status.
My dad was a conscientious objector in World War II and did 4 years of alternative service in which he worked in other areas that some Mennonites will accept non-combatant roles in the military, but most of the time we have Mennonite institutions that give us alternatives to military service.
In your congregations, you're a pastor. In your congregation, where are your pastors trained? Where are your roots when they came over to North America from Europe?
We have a seminary in the Goshen-Elkhart area of Indiana, Associated Biblical Mennonite Seminaries, which is actually 2 seminaries. There are 2 major Mennonite denominations, General Conference Mennonite Church and the Mennonite Church. We used to call them the Old Mennonites. And actually, those are sort of waves of immigration. Some Mennonites came very early after the persecutions to the United States and have been in the United States for a long time. My particular family did not choose that route. They lived in the Alsace-Lorraine area after the persecutions in Switzerland. And then in 1790 were invited by Catherine the Great of Russia to come to the Ukraine. Catherine the Great was looking for good Germanic, hardworking, industrious types.
Sure.
And she promised my people religious freedom in exchange for them settling the Ukraine. And they went to the Ukraine in 1791. And at the end there...
Rather than come to America, they went to the Ukraine.
Some people would have chosen to go other places, and my family lived there nearly 100 years. By 1874, that situation had changed, and their religious freedom had been taken away from them. And the Santa Fe Railroad along in Kansas, had been given by the United States government 5 miles on each side of the tracks, and they were selling off that land. And in order to maintain stability along the railroad lines, we're doing the same thing, looking for good farming people to settle along the railroad tracks to preserve the safety of the railroad trains. And so in 1874, my family, all my great-grandparents, came across on a ship called the City of Richmond to central Kansas. And they brought with them the red turkey wheat from the Ukraine, which has changed agriculture in the United States, because that's the primary type of wheat that all of the central United States now grows. That's what our primary agricultural background in the United States. So, you know, it's another example of an immigrant group that brought something and contributed greatly to the building of this country.
David, when you listen to your pastor talk, and when I've known Kathy and have been excited about her commitment to this community and to the ecumenical spirit of this community, what I hear in this woman of faith is a person who really believes in what has been given to her and that it has something to offer to other people. Now, you're a part of that community, a part of that congregation. What happens when you guys, your community gathers together? What do you do on a Sunday? Is that your worship day? Sunday. It's
right.
Okay. You gather on a Sunday. You have liturgy. You have worship. What happens? Is Kathy? Do you wear a robe? What happens if a visitor walks into the Austin Mennonite congregation to worship? What is the experience on Sunday in worship?
I think as someone who came in from basically what I would say was the outside into the Mennonite church, the thing that I saw more than anything else was an acceptance of newcomers. The Mennonite Central Committee is a good example. There's over 1,000 volunteers in 30 different countries in the world, and over half of those are non-ethnic Mennonites like myself, who come from backgrounds, Lutheran, Catholic, Methodist, all different types of backgrounds. And we all fit into the Mennonite Central Committee and the Mennonite Church, I think, because it is a place where people feel welcome and people feel like there's an openness there. There isn't very rigorous church service. It's not real.
Formal?
Exactly, not very formal. Every Sunday will be a little different. I even got up, and I'm not a public speaker, got up one Sunday and spoke about my experience in Bolivia and in Africa. And I think those type of things, having the congregation participate a lot, and more of a community type of thing.
What I hear you saying is that there's a good future for the Mennonites, even though you don't go out and proselyte. It's not your effort to bring people from other denominations in, but if people want a group that is open, a group that is committed to servanthood, a group that is involved in peacemaking, the Mennonites are a faith community that one needs to consider as a possibility. Would you agree, Pastor?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I feel like we have an awful lot to offer this world. We live in a very violent society that needs to hear words of peace and nonviolence, and we need a sense of community, and we need values. We're very family-oriented. We're, I think, very clear about our values, not to the point of imposing them on others. I mean, we allow for dissenters within our group. We're very committed to the idea of the sacredness of life, which results in being opposed to the death penalty, for example, as a denomination. We're very, I've always, growing up, people will always say, well, is your family liberal or conservative politically? Well, I don't know where you put Mennonites, because there are issues that we seem very conservative on. And then there are issues that we seem very what we would consider politically liberal, because we're not deciding where we are on those issues based on just what we feel like from one day to the next. I mean, our voice of authority is what we read in the New Testament and what we think Jesus asked us to do.
You've given us an overview of the history, where the Mennonites are throughout the world in their service. What about locally? You have an Austin Mennonite congregation. Tell us a little bit about that. David talked about the worship service and what it's like to come into that. But what about the Austin Mennonite congregation here? You're small.
We're small. We're a brand new congregation. We were chartered in 1986. I'm the first pastor. We had a minister of growth before then, part-time. I'm the first pastor of Austin Mennonite Church. We have 26 members. Our Sunday morning attendance is from 32 to 45, depending. Easter Sunday was 60. We do lots of family events, lots of picnics, lots of
Summer camps.
Lots of sort of community building events. We're very small, and yet we work ecumenically. We're involved in Austin Metropolitan Ministries and North Central Austin Community of Churches, just a variety of institutions. For one thing, that helps us bring about the mission of our church. And we're paired up with Gethsemane Lutheran to feed homeless people on Thursday mornings at Faith Lutheran Church. We do a lot of service. We built the fence at Project Transitions, the AIDS hospice, last year. This Saturday, we're still working on Hands-On Housing, which is an AMM project, and we haven't finished our house, so we have to go back and paint this Saturday to finish the house we're working on. Service is a big part of what we do, reaching out into the community.
Born in persecution and suffering, and yet the words of the faith. Let your light so shine before others that they might see your good works and give glory to the Father, the one who has loved you and created you. It seems to me that's what you've done so very well. What's the future then of the Austin Mennonite congregation in Austin? Sounds good to me.
We'd like to think so.
And the Austin and then the Mennonite group throughout the world, they're going to have a good future of continuing what? Peacemaking, servanthood, and I like what you said, empowerment, David. Empowerment to build community. David Kemp, thanks. Civil engineer, member of the Austin Mennonite congregation. Thanks for being on Austin Faith Dialogue. And Kathy, it's a joy to work with you. And your enthusiasm and your spirit, I think, as Pastor Kathy Reed, the Austin Mennonite congregation will grow and serve the Austin community. And I want to thank all of you. And I ask you to give Pastor Reed a call, discuss about the Mennonites, and continue to watch Austin Faith Dialogue and know more about your neighbors and their faith in our Austin community. Peace be with you.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries